Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Chaipraditkul, and together with a bunch of very talented creators who you can probably find in the description box below, I am doing a reading of Carmilla by Sherida. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. I am reading chapter 4, so I hope you enjoy. I told you that I was charmed with her in most particulars. There were some that did not please me so well. She was above middle height for a woman. I shall begin by describing her. She was slender and woefully graceful. Except for that her movements were languid, very languid indeed. There was nothing in her appearance that would indicate an invalid. Her complexion was rich and brilliant. Her features were small and beautifully formed. Her eyes, large, dark, and lustrous. Her hair was quite wonderful. I never saw hair so magnificently thick and long when it was down and about her shoulders. I have often placed my hands under it and laughed with wonder at its weight. It was exquisitely fine and soft, in a color of rich, very dark brown, with some gold. I loved to let it down, tumbling in its own weight, as in her room, she lay back in her chair, taking in her sweet, low voice. I used to fold it and braid it, and spread it out and play with it. Heavens! If I had known but all. I said there were particulars which did not please me. I have told you that her confidence won me with the first night I saw her, but I found that she exercised with respect to herself, her mother, her history, everything in fact connected with her life, plans and people, an ever wakeful reserve. I dare say I was unreasonable, or perhaps I was wrong. I dare say I ought to have respected the solemn injunction laid upon my father by the stately lady in velvet black. But curiosity is a restless and unscrupulous passion, and no one girl could endure, with patience, that hers should be baffled by another. What harm could it do to anyone to tell me what I so ardently desired to know? Had she no trust in my good sense or honor? Why would she not believe me when I assured her so solemnly that I would not divulge one syllable of what she told me to any mortal breathing? There was a coldness, it seemed to me, beyond her years, in her smiling melancholy, persistent refusal to afford me the least ray of light. I cannot say that we quarreled upon this front, for she would not quarrel upon any. It was, of course, very unfair of me to press her, very ill-bred, but I could not help it. I'd just as well have left enough alone. What she did tell me she amounted in an unconscionable estimation to nothing. It was all summed up in 3 very vague disclosures. First, her name was Carmilla. Second, her family was very ancient and noble. Third, her home lay in a direction to the west. She would not tell me the name of her family, nor armorial bearings, nor the name of the estate, nor even the country they lived in. You are not to suppose that I worried her incessantly on these subjects. I watched opportunity and rather insinuated rather than urged my inquiries. Once or twice, indeed, I laid an attack on her more directly. But no matter what my tactics, utter failure was invariably the result. Reproaches and caresses were all lost upon her. But I must add this, that her evasion was connected with so pretty a melancholy and depression, with so many and even passionate declarations of her liking for me, and trust in my honor, and with so many promises that I should last know all, that I could not find it in my heart to be offended by her. She used to place her pretty arms about my neck, draw me to her, and laying her cheek upon mine, murmur with her lips near my ear, "Dearest, your little heart is wounded. Think me not cruel because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. If your dear heart is wounded, my wild heart bleeds with yours. In the rapture of my enormous humiliation, I live in your warm life. And you shall die, sweetly die, into mine. I cannot help it. As I draw near to you, you in your turn will draw near to others, and learn the rapture that is cruelty, and yet which is love. So for a while, seek to know no more of me and mine, but trust me with all your loving spirit." Her agitations and her language were unintelligible to me. From these foolish embraces, which were not of very frequent occurrence, I must allow I used to wish to extricate myself, but my energies seemed to fail me. Her murmured words sounded like a lullaby in my ear, and soothed my resistance into trance, from which I only seemed to recover myself when she withdrew her arms. In these mysterious moods I did not like her. I experienced strange tumultuous excitement, with pleasurable and ever anon, mingled with a vague sense of fear and disgust. I had no distinct thoughts about her while such scenes lasted, but I was conscious of a love growing into adoration and also to abhorrence. This, I know, is a paradox, but I can make no other attempt to explain the feeling. I now write, after an interval of more than 10 years, with a trembling hand, that a confused and horrible recollection of certain occurrences and situations in the ordeal through which I unconsciously passed, through with a vivid and very sharp remembrance of the main current event of my story. But I suspect in all lives there are certain emotional scenes, those which our passions have most wildly and terribly roused, that are of all others most vaguely and dimly remembered. Sometimes, after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with fond pressure, renewed again and again, blushingly soft, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with a tumultuous respiration. It was like the odour of a lover. It embarrassed me. It was hateful and yet overpowering, and with gloating eyes she drew me to her, and her hot lips travelled along my cheek in kisses, and she would whisper, almost in sobs, "You are mine, you shall be mine, you and I are one forever." And then she had thrown herself back on the chair, with her small hands over her eyes, leaving me trembling. "Are we related?" I used to ask. "What can you mean by all this? I remind you perhaps of someone whom you love, but you must not. I hate it. I don't know you. I don't know myself when you look and talk so." She used to sigh at my vehemence, and then turn away and drop my hand. Respecting these very extraordinary manifestations, I strove in vain to form any satisfactory theory. I could not refer to them to affection or a trick. It was unmistakably the momentary breaking of suppressed instinct and emotion. Was she, notwithstanding her mother's volunteered denial, subject to a brief visitation of insanity? Or was there here a disguise and a romance? I had read in old storybooks of such things. The lover found his way into the house and sought to prosecute his suit in masquerade, with the assistance of a clever old adventuress. But there were many things against this hypothesis. Highly interesting it was to my vanity. I could boast of no little attentions, such as masculine gallantry delights to offer. Between these passionate moments there were long intervals of commonplace, of gaiety, of brooding melancholy, during which, except when that I detected her eyes so full of melancholy fire, following me, at times I might have been as nothing to her. Except in these brief periods of mysterious excitement, her ways were girlish. There were always a languor about her, quite incompatible with masculine system in a state of health. In some respects her habits were odd, perhaps not so singular in the opinion of a town lady like you, as they appeared to us rustic people. She used to come down very late, generally not till 1 o'clock. She would then take a cup of chocolate, but eating nothing. We went then for a walk, which was a mere saunter, and she seemed at most almost immediately exhausted, and she returned to the Schloss or sat on the benches that were placed here and there among the trees. This was a bodily languor which her mind did not sympathize. She was an animated talker and very intelligent. She sometimes alluded for a moment to her own home, or a mention adventure or situation, or an early recollection which indicated a people of strange manners and described customs which we knew nothing. I gathered from these chance hints that her native country was much more remote than I had first fancied. As we thus sat one afternoon under the trees, a funeral passed us by. It was that of a pretty young girl whom I had often seen, the daughter of one of the rangers of the forest. The poor man was walking behind the coffin of his darling. She was his only child, and he looked quite heartbroken. Peasants walking two and two came behind, and they were soon singing a funeral hymn. I rose to mark my respect as they passed, and joined in the hymn they were very sweetly singing. My companion shook me a little roughly, and I turned surprise. She said briskly, "Don't you perceive how discordant that is?" "I think it very sweet on the contrary," I answered, vexed at the interruption, and very uncomfortable lest the people who composed the little procession should observe and resent what was passing. I resumed, therefore, and instantly again was interrupted. "You pierce my ears," said Carmilla almost angrily, and stopping her ears with her teeny fingers. "Besides, how can you tell that your religion and mine are the same? Your forms wound me, and I hate funerals. What a fuss! Why must you die? Everyone must die, and all are happier when they do. Come home." "My father has gone with a clergyman to the churchyard. I thought you knew she was to be buried today." "She? I don't trouble my head about peasants. I don't know who she is," answered Carmilla with a flash from her fine eyes. "She is a poor girl who fancied she saw a ghost a fortnight ago, and has been dying ever since, till yesterday when she expired." "Tell me nothing about ghosts. I shan't sleep tonight if you do. I hope there is no plague or fever coming. All this looks very like it," I continued. "Papa says such horrible fancies do accompany some forms of fever. She was quite well the day before. She sank afterwards and died before a week." "Well, her funeral's over, I hope. Her hymn sung. And all our ears shan't be tortured with the discordant jargon. It's made me nervous. Sit down here beside me. Sit close. Hold my hand. Press it. Hard. Hard. Harder." We moved back a little and had come to another seat. She sat down. Her face underwent a change that alarmed and even terrified me for a moment. It darkened and became horribly livid. Her teeth and hand were clenched. She frowned and compressed her lips, and continued with an irrepressible shudder. All her energy seemed strained to suppress a fit, which she was then breathlessly tugging, and at length a low convulsive cry of suffering broke from her, and gradually the hysteria subsided. "There! That comes from strangling people with hymns," she said at last. Hold me still, it is passing away." And so gradually it did, and perhaps to dissipate the somber impression which the spectacle had left upon me, she became unusually animated and chatty, and so we went home. This was the first time that I had seen her exhibit any definable symptoms of that delicacy of health which her mother had spoken of. It was the first time also that I had seen her exhibit anything like a temper. Both passed away like a summer cloud, and I never thought once afterwards did I witness on her part a momentary sign of anger. I will tell you how it happened. She and I were looking out of one of the long drawing-room windows when there entered the courtyard, over the drawbridge, a figure of a wanderer who I knew very well. He used to visit the Schloss generally twice a year. It was a figure of a hunchback, with a sharp, lean figure that generally accompanied deformity. He wore a pointed black beard, and was smiling from ear to ear, showing his white fangs. He was dressed in buff, black, and scarlet, and crossed with more straps and belts than I could count, from which hung all manner of things. Behind he carried a magic lantern with 2 boxes, which I well knew, in one of which was a salamander, and the other a mandrake. These monsters used to make my father laugh. They were compounded of parts of monkeys, parrots, squirrels, fish, and hedgehogs, dried and stitched together with great neatness and startling effect. He had a fiddle, a box of conjoined apparatus, a pair of fossils and a mask attached to his belt, and several other mysterious cases dangling about him, and a black staff with copper ferrules in his hand. His companion was a rough, spare dog that followed at his heels, but stopped short, suspiciously, at the drawbridge, and in a little while began to howl dismally. In the meantime, the mountebank, standing amidst the courtyard, raised his grotesque hat and made us a very ceremonious bow, paying his compliments very volubly in accessible French and German not much better. Then, Disengaging his fiddle, he began to scrape lively into the air, which he sang with a merry discord, dancing with ludicrous airs and activity that made me laugh, in spite of the dog's howling. Then he advanced to the window with many smiles and salutations, and his hat in his left hand and his fiddle under his arm, with a fluency that never took his breath. He gabbled out the long advertisement of all his accomplishments and resources to the various arts, which he placed at our service, and the curiosities and the entertainments which it was in his power, at our bidding, to display. Will your ladyships be pleased to buy an amulet against the opium, of which is going like the wolf, I hear, through these woods? He said, dropping his hat onto the pavement. They are dying of it, right and left, and here is a charm that never fails, only pinned to the pillow, and you may laugh in his face. These charms consisted of oblong slips of vellum with cabalistic ciphers and diagrams upon them. Carmilla instantly purchased one, and so did I. He was looking up, and we were smiling down upon him, amused. At last I can answer for myself. Piercing black eye, as he looked upon our faces, seemed to detect something that fixed for a moment his curiosity. In an instant he unrolled a leather case, full of a manner of odd steel instruments. See here, lady, he said, displaying it and addressing me. I profess, among other things less useful, the art of dentistry, plague like a dog. He interpolated. Silence, beast! He howls that your ladyships can scarcely hear a word. Your noble friend, the young lady at your right, has the sharpest tooth, long, thin, pointed like an owl, and a needle. Ha ha! With my sharp and long sight, as I look up, I have seen it distinctly. Now, if it happens to hurt the young lady, and I think it must, here I am, here with my file, my punch, my nippers. I will make it round and blunt, if her ladyship pleases. No longer the tooth of a fish, but a beautiful young lady is she. Hey, is the young lady displeased? Have I been too bold? Have I offended her? The young lady indeed looked very angry as she drew back from the window. How dares that mountebank insult us so? Where's your father? I shall demand redress from him. My father would have the wretch tied up to the pump and flogged with a cart whip and burnt at the bones with a cattle brand. She retired from a window a step or two and sat down, and had hardly lost sight of the offender when her wrath subsided and as suddenly as it had risen, and she gradually recovered from her usual tone and seemed to forget the little hunchback in his follies. My father was out of spirits that evening. On coming in, he told us that there had been another case very similar to the two fatal ones which had lately occurred. The sister of a young peasant on his estate, only a mile away, was very ill, and had been, as she described it, attacked very nearly the same way, and was now slowly but steadily sinking. All this, my father said, is strictly referable to natural causes. These poor people infect one another with their superstitions, and so repeat in imagination the images of terror that have invested their neighbors. But that very circumstance frightens one horribly, Carmilla said. How so? Inquired my father. I am so afraid of fancying such things. I think it would be as bad as reality. We are in God's hands, and nothing can happen without his permission, and all will end well for those who love him. He is our faithful creator. He has made us and will take care of us. Creator? Nature? Said the young lady in answer to my gentle father. And this disease that invades the country is natural, nature, and all things proceed from nature, don't they? All things in heaven and in earth and in under the earth, and they act and live as nature ordains? I think so. The doctor said he would come early today, my father said after a silence. I want to know what he thinks about it, and what he thinks we had better do. Doctors never did me any good, Carmilla said. Then you have been ill? I asked. More ill than you ever were, she answered. Long ago? Yes, a long time. I suffered from this very illness, but I forget all but my pain and weakness, and they were not so bad as are suffered in other diseases. You were young then. I dare say. Let us talk no more of it. You would not wound a friend. She looked languidly in my eyes and passed her arm around my waist lovingly and led me out of the room. My father was busy over some papers near the window. Why does your papa like to frighten us? Said the pretty girl with a sigh and a shudder. He doesn't, dear Carmilla. It is the furthest thing from his mind. Are you afraid, dearest? I should be very much, if I fancied that there were any real danger of my being attacked as those poor people were. You are afraid to die? Yes, everyone is. But to die as lovers may, to die together, so that they may live together. Girls are caterpillars while they live in the world, to finally be butterflies when the summer comes. But in the meantime, there are grubs and larvae you don't see, each of them with their peculiar propensities, necessities, and structures. So says Monsieur Buffon in his book In the Next Room. Later in the day, the doctor came and was closeted with Papa for some time. He was a skillful man of 16 upwards. He wore powder and shaved his pale face and as smooth as a pumpkin. He and Papa emerged from the room together, and I heard Papa laugh and say as they came out, "Well, I do wonder at a wise man like you. What do you say to hippogriffs and dragons?" The doctor was smiling and made an answer, shaking his head. Nevertheless, life and death are mysterious states, and we know little of the resources of either. They walked on, and I heard no more. I did not then know what the doctor had been broaching, but I think I guess it now. I hope that you enjoyed the reading of this chapter, and the next chapter is chapter 5 by Dixie Cochran, so stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy. Bye!